Welcome to this December 1st storage provider meetup, everybody. Glad you could all make it today. We've got some stuff to discuss as always. However, this storage provider meetup begins on the 1st of this month. And what's also interesting about the 1st of each month is that is Incentives Day. So each of you should have been paid some incentives for this month already. I've been made aware that there was a bit of an oopsie when it came to our incentives payout amount. So we're investigating that, and we'll have something to announce in the next day or so on what we're going to do about it. But that's just, if you look pretty closely, the incentives amount should be around the right figure, but it might not be exactly. So we're working on that, but not too crazy of a situation. Just thought I'd be sure to mention that up front, just in case anybody was worried, and if they had done the math for exactly the amount that they're expecting, and maybe it was a little off. So also exciting is that I'm sure you've all seen, based on what we talked about in last call and in the announcement channels, we do have our Black Friday and Beyond sale running at the moment. So this is pretty cool. This is the best way to get access to SPF-B, which has been much discussed and anticipated, and we're going to touch on that today again as well. But if you haven't taken a look, or you haven't taken a look in a little bit, check out the xminer.net. We have that sale running. It's the best opportunity to get a 64 terabyte miner, or any miner with the SPF-B incentive and some discounted prices for certain things. So that's pretty neat. That'll be running to the end of this month, to December 31st, and then on January 1st of 2023. These current deals will no longer be valid. So kind of the last good opportunity, or the last awesome opportunity to scoop up some examiners. And yeah, I mean, I think at this point, we'll have a lot more to touch on later in the call, but I think at this point, the writing is kind of on the wall that we are working with some pretty big people that have lots of data. We're starting to float our software to them. They're starting to deploy it. And I think that this would be a really good time this month to, if you have your ear to the floor and you're kind of seeing where things are headed, that it would be a good time to get an examiner. Or if you're just thinking about it, or you kind of see the need, or you see a place that you could put one, then I think that this is as attractive of an offer as you're ever going to get. You get 10,000 SPF-B on the 64 terabyte miner, reduced price, and we're just happy to send some extra into the wild right before the new year. So I did touch on SPF-B there. So work on that is continuing on the timeline that we announced. So we're now kind of heading into or closer to the first week of December. So over the next week or week and a half or so, we will be setting up some internal test nets. This will be to deploy some of the code and some of the modifications that were required to implement SPF-B. So this is all fitting in the timeline that we announced with our hard fork announcement. So what is kind of interesting or somewhat unique about these testnets compared to some of the ones that have happened in the past, since the changes with the SPF-B involve some requirements that are specific to storage providers, for example, namely the fact that in order to yield a claim on SPF-B, you need to be an active storage provider. Then on our testnet, we will also have some test storage providers and some test storage nodes on the testnet, which is kind of fun. So that'll be interesting, but that'll be taking place over the next week and a half or so. And then as we get more toward mid-December, we will have that full release, that full software release to put out in the wild for you guys. Of course, examiners will auto update, and DIYs, hopefully at this point, kind of know the deal of what that upgrade process looks like. But of course, we'll make it easy for you. We'll make it straightforward. We'll have pretty straightforward instructions as usual. And hopefully that'll give you still ample notice to upgrade before the holidays take place and before the eggnog gets flowing, and then the hard fork takes place. So yeah, so everything kind of on schedule, on plan there, which is great. Kudos to the core devs that are making that happen. Now a little bit more in my wheelhouse, something that's been kind of ruminating for a little bit now. That's exciting, of course, though. So we heard from Psychotics, or Patrick, if you remember, a couple of weeks ago about some of the S3 app integration work that's being done. So just to kind of reframe that, or if you're a little rusty. So S3 apps, typically S3 is kind of associated with Amazon because it was a protocol. I think the S3 is like something like simple storage service, but it's kind of the de facto protocol for cloud storage at this point. At least it's a very common implementation or standard for serving data from kind of a client to a server cloud configuration type thing. So the gist is that there are like thousands of apps that are written to this spec, or at least support in some capacity this spec. And these applications do various things from like a self-hosted cloud. So it'll give you like a Google Drive or Dropbox type experience, but it's ultimately running on a server that you run yourself. So there's no like privacy concerns, or you're not worried about being banned for something, or there's all sorts of reasons why you might want a self-run server, self-operated cloud. So there's apps that do that, namely like OwnCloud or NextCloud. There's all sorts of like backup and archive types applications. Those are probably some of the biggest. There is like surveillance video type stuff. So if you're the kind of person that has a Ring doorbell, well, I guess Ring I think is integrated right into Amazon actually. But if you have some kind of surveillance video need, there are applications that are specifically tailored to ingesting some of that footage, being able to help you access older footage easily and like manage that. So all these kinds of applications, by supporting S3, our software, our relayer, is able to directly work out of the box with all sorts of existing workflows, and we're not kind of reinventing the wheel. And the reason I say it like that is because some of the other people in our space that are also trying to work toward a distributed cloud and decentralized cloud, some of them haven't taken this approach, and they have come up with their own proprietary protocols requiring people that are hoping to use their service to kind of re-engineer some things, or not work out of the box with the apps that they already like and use. So this is a strategy that we think is winning. We've got pretty good reception toward it. But what it does entail also is that with these thousands of apps, I think it's probably fair to boil it down to probably 100 or so of those couple thousand. There might only be 100 of those apps that have a pretty significant monthly user base. I think that'd be fair to say. So what we are working toward, and this is what we kind of got toward with Patrick a couple of weeks ago on that call, or when we interviewed him, is that we're looking to spend the time to kind of work through these apps, make sure that they work out of the box and as expected with our relayer software. And then even, and this is kind of open-ended and fun part, there's opportunity to also be mindful of, does it not just work out of the box, but are there ways that we can enhance and improve performance? So are there some configurations in the app that you can set for better performance? Are there some tweaks or modifications to the actual relayer service itself, some configuration settings that would help you maximize performance as well? So this is a pretty big job, and probably something that we're going to continue to be doing for a long time, but this is very at the center and at the core of what enables the relayer and makes it powerful. So this is important work, and that's something that is continuing. I see Jeffrey in the audience this week. So he's actually another guy that is a similar story to Patrick, where he's kind of a community guy. He came in and was like pretty interested and heard about what we were working on, thought it was a great idea, is someone that kind of has an IT or tech background himself, but not necessarily an expertise in specifically like cloud storage or anything, but was able to kind of take what skills he had and kind of deployed the relayer, played around with it a bit, and then got in contact with us and was reporting some of what he was finding. And so we met up and have started kind of working together. So he is also a member of our S3 integration team. So I just figured that was worth calling out and bringing some attention to, because we're very thankful. It's awesome work, and something that perhaps isn't the most, well, I think the way I'd put it is that it's something that is probably only of interest to like 1% of people, but to that 1% of people, this is so crucial, these findings and publications that we're going to be putting out, that yeah, it's so important to that subset of people that do this specifically, that this is the kind of thing that would conceivably help them choose one cloud service over another. If we have well tested and well polished support and integration for an app that they use and are a big fan of, then that's the kind of thing that gets wins. And the more wins that we get, the more data on the network for you guys. So everybody's happy. So just figured I'd mention that that's ongoing. We have those calls still going, and more developments are on the way. Another thing I would like to bring attention to, so we, as kind of alluded to in some of our earlier calls, we do have our partners. So we do have some storage partners that are interested in using our service. Some of them have already set up our relayer options. So we have to be speaking a little bit carefully here. Just from, I'd love to be able to share everything that I know, but some of it is somewhat sensitive and private, and we'll always have that attitude. There are some things that we love and are happy to be transparent about, and there are some things that it's just the way that it is, that we have to be a little bit tight-lipped. But what I will say, so we have a couple of large partners that are starting to spin up relayers, which is exciting. And one thing that we are beginning to have kind of the process and the conversation with is targeting specific regions for storage providers. So I think in the future, it would make a lot of sense, and it's actually on my short list of storage provider meetup topics, to do one on incentives specifically. So keep an eye out for that. But we are beginning to kind of discuss and start the process for how can we ensure that there is ample capacity and storage providers to choose from in a specific region of the world if we have a partner there and they have an incredible need for cloud data on our network. So that's really cool. We have a lot of ideas that we're kind of throwing out there. So I am happy to share some of those. We haven't kind of finalized what this might look like or what it will look like yet. And this probably is going to continue to be an evolving thing, but some ideas that we're open to at the moment anyway are referral type things. So if you can set up a kind of custom xminer.net referral code or referral link or something like that, and if you can drive some traffic to it, bring in some people, get some of your friends interested, then there can be some sort of benefit to yourself for having done that. Some other ways that we can do it, as I alluded to just now or just earlier, are incentives. So we're kind of beginning to think about the process for how can we fairly but also attractively entice some extra capacity to a specific region. So that's pretty neat. And I think ultimately this is the kind of conversation that, although we're beginning to have it now, is going to kind of be never ending to an extent. I think that as we grow our service and we get more diverse clientele from more regions of the world, I think that this is going to be a kind of continuing process of, okay, we have somebody who's coming in and they have specific needs in maybe Sao Paulo, Brazil. That's kind of their region. What can we do, or what are our options for helping boost capacity there? Because we might have maybe 20 storage providers in Sao Paulo with something like, 600 terabytes of space. But in discussing with them, with the client, and understanding their needs, we'd kind of have a target and we'd have a goal that we would want to hit, and what are our options for helping get there. So another thing that I think is a strong consideration when we get down to that level of trying to bring certain storage providers to certain areas, is also having to understand the networking environment there. So as we've learned from our examiners that have come online since the start of the year, we have learned that some parts of the world are pretty reliant on CGNAT. So that is a specific, that's like an internet service provider level configuration that has implications on whether you can do port forwarding or not. So there are some people who have home internet, but because of the way that home internet is delivered, might not be able to do port forwarding, which is tough. And for some people, that meant that they had to make a decision about how to get an Xminer online because they couldn't do it at home like they expected. So there are some parts of the world that CGNAT is pretty prevalent, and there are some where it isn't. So we need to start building that knowledge base of where that is a thing, because that would affect our ability to just show up in a region and build a ton of capacity, which is something that we would very much like to be able to do. And then that can work the other way too. So there are some pockets of the world that are fantastically well networked. Perhaps like South Korea comes to mind. It's my understanding that that's a part of the world where the average home connection is very well served. They have large access to bandwidth, like probably unmetered lines, or like no real data caps. Fiber optic to home is pretty common. So that could be a region that we could target with some specific campaigns that kind of say, hey, if you have fast home internet and a lot of bandwidth, here's a way to be able to kind of monetize that and earn some passive income on bandwidth that would otherwise be unused. And that's a way that we could kind of specifically target the advantages or the strengths of a region. And we could think about this the opposite direction too. So while we could think, well, I guess we've traditionally up to this point kind of thought about it like, hey, if we have a client that is from this kind of region of the world, and we only have so much capacity there and we would like more, what are our options? Another thing that we could do is if we identify a region that we have lots of capacity and don't have a ton of need, we could potentially specifically target people, target enterprises and clients in that region, or try and build capacity in places that we think have a lot of potential, like, for example, perhaps South Korea or some other place that is well networked and has good, fairly like stable internet and all the sorts of qualities that would make for attractive and high quality providers. And we could start approaching clients and building that capacity at the same time in a way that would probably make a lot of sense. So the theme that I think I'm hoping is kind of apparent from here is that we think of our storage network as kind of a mesh. It's something that is dynamic, and we can bring capacity online in one place. I guess probably not so much to take it from somewhere else and bring it up. It's not quite that, but it's it's very dynamic, and there's things that we can do and efforts that we can take to change how it looks with time, reward certain behaviors, and try and bring capacity online wherever we need it. And that's something that's really cool. So that's not something that's totally unique to a distributed network. Obviously, existing traditional data center, they also, if they want to serve a region better, they can build a data center there. So that would be kind of their equivalent of what we're doing. But what that involves is having to buy a ton of land, perhaps negotiate some kind of tax understanding with a local government or municipal government for the kind of water and electricity that they'll be required to use. And these are multi-year endeavors as well. For a data center to pop up in an area is an incredible amount of work, an incredible amount of money, and takes a long time. And these are strengths that, or those are disadvantages that traditional cloud has compared to us, where we can fairly dynamically target certain areas, and within the span of weeks to months, perhaps double or triple or even like 10x the kind of capacity that we have in a certain part of the world. And these are often worth mentioning as well, that these kinds of the world would potentially be places that are underserved from traditional cloud as well. So that's something that if you are a enterprise and you have a need for cloud storage, that could make us, our service, more attractive, is if you're perhaps too far or you're just not near a traditional data center, then there's specific advantages that come from using a kind of pop-up cloud like us. So yeah, there's just so many different ways that you can approach it and cut it that make us pretty attractive as a cloud service. And these are points that we're going to polish and develop and continue to kind of improve the process on. And so yeah, when we have specifics that we're able to share, so I think I mentioned that we are beginning that process now of what can we do to incentivize storage in a specific region, because that's something that we're pretty strongly looking toward. So yeah, incentives and referrals and perhaps some other things. When we have specifics to share there, we'll do that. So keep an eye on the announcements channel, of course. I mean, that's always a good place to look, even apart from just this specific topic. But yeah, hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we'll have something to be able to share there. So now I think I'm going to begin to, just before I get into this, I would like to touch on as well, I know a couple of weeks ago I mentioned SCP University. So this is something that this is a curriculum or an effort that I'm kind of cultivating. And I'll keep this short, but the gist of what we're going for is that we have lots of people, probably if you're listening to this, that could be you, probably is you. We have lots of people that are interested in what we're doing here. They have heard probably different pieces and bits of this SC Prime network and what we're working on, and everything that they've heard sounds really good and cool, but they just wish they understood all of it. So that's the experience for a lot of people, and myself included when I first got into this space. That's the experience for many of us when we first start digging in and trying to understand how everything works, because let's face it, let's be real, that the scope of our project and what we're working on is pretty immense. So we're competing with some of the, like on one hand and on one side, we're competing with some of the biggest companies of our time. On another hand, we're using some technology that is like so new, it's almost like challenging to even find people qualified to work on it. In some other ways, we're like having to solve problems that have never been solved before, which is exciting but intimidating. And so that there's just, the scope of our project, I think when you realize the scale that we're working at and how many different facets it covers, it's pretty incredible that there are some people that are even able to really kind of wrap their head around it at all. But what I'm working on, this SCP University, we've got it down to 3 specific lectures. So I'm kind of aiming for 3 lectures of about 1 hour length each. These will be held live, but then recorded as well. I think I'll get a sense of what to do with the recording as we kind of get closer. Potentially, we want to just keep hosting these sessions of maybe 10 to 15 people or so each. I might make the recordings available afterward publicly, but that's not a decision I'm committing to at this point. We might decide that we like having these little classes of 10 to 15 people, and you all go through the 3 lectures together in your a little graduating class. That could be fun. But anyway, expect an announcement over the next week or so for when the first class is taking enrollment, as we'll keep with the university theme. So yeah, keep an eye on that. It'll be in the announcements channel, of course. And I think that could be a really cool opportunity for anyone who's listening to this to get a chance to hear kind of a straight line explanation from point A to B, or I guess since we touched on so many things in between A to Z, of exactly kind of from the horse's mouth, I guess, of what our project is, how all of these different pieces and bits that you've heard of kind of fit together, and in a way that hopefully will make a lot of sense to you, and you'll come out of it with a much deeper understanding of kind of how our project works, how these different pieces fit together, and what I think we're really hoping, and I think a lot of the people who are enrolling in it or would be attending are hoping to get out of it, is the ability to then come away from it able to like then explain to other people, and you can then, well, I guess we call it evangelizing, but yeah, situations like where what I had last week, where I ran into a friend that I hadn't seen since before the pandemic and before the lockdown. So we kind of caught up, and he got to asking what I was working on these days or what I was up to. And we spent about 30 minutes just kind of there in the street where I was kind of explaining one piece at a time what SC Prime was and how our network is really cool. And his background was in kind of business and cloud. So he totally understood what I was saying and was asking really good questions. And it was just so encouraging. And I like felt awesome about it afterward that I'm able, and I felt lucky to be able to explain it so well and touch on all of these things that we're working on in such a way that was highly interesting. And it kind of took me back to when I was at NAB in Las Vegas, and I was getting to do that all day. So I think I take great joy and pleasure, and I feel lucky that I'm able to explain how awesome of a project this is and what we're working on and how exciting it is. I truly feel that this is, like, I feel in my heart of hearts that this is like a once in a generation opportunity to totally like push forward and pioneer on some concepts that are fantastic concepts on their own, but make total complete sense when combined in this way. I think this package and this approach that we're taking is like super compelling. I think our approaches and our plan and our process and how we've architected our network is a winning strategy. I'm confident that that's going to be proven over the next several years. And I just feel like that the ability to explain that is something that I want for all of you. So consider enrolling in our SCP University once we are able to offer that, and hopefully you will be able to explain and talk to other people in your life that maybe you know and are tech savvy, and explain that with the same detail and fire in your heart that I feel. Now, we do have one last topic that we're going to touch on. So this will be a long one. I think I first covered a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago or so, that we are going to do some kind of special topics in our storage provider meetups. These are topics that will hopefully be of particular interest to storage providers. We have kind of used the platform of the storage provider meetup to just kind of generally update everybody on what we're working on, because obviously you are the storage providers, and knowing what the storage is up to is pretty pertinent. So, but to kind of maintain that this is kind of a home for storage providers and storage provider specific interests, then I think it makes sense to have time each week or every other week, I guess that's when we're doing it, or that we make some time to cover topics that are specifically of interest to storage providers. And this week we are going to talk about one of the most requested topics, which is metadata. You've probably heard about metadata. You might even know what it is, but there's a lot that you should know. There's a lot of points that we can clarify on. And I brought somebody who's pretty qualified to talk about it with us here up to the stage. How are you doing, Mark?
Hey, Henry. Yeah, I'm good. Very good.
Awesome. So, I know we have a couple points that we kind of touched on in advance that we wanted to begin with, but how about we begin with what is metadata? Because that's pretty fundamental to our conversation going forward. So, can you tell me what metadata is and why I might need to worry about it?
Yeah, sure. So I've actually just posted a link in the events channel with a document which I wrote a few months back, trying to explain partly I wrote it at the time for my own benefit to understand what it was all about and all the different components. But from a provider's point of view, it really identifies your provider and all the kind of history associated to the wallet, the contracts which provider has had over time, and the storage, the actual sectors of data which you're storing, where they are, which folders they're in, etc. So that's why the metadata is just so vital to a provider. So you can't just kind of wipe it and start again, or if it gets corrupted, this is why it's important, because it identifies all the different aspects of your provider. And that document kind of goes into some of the detail as to what the different components are. Touch on a few of them here. So consensus is one of the folders you'll see in your metadata directory, which is the blockchain. That is the blockchain, and everyone will have the same blockchain at the same time. If sometimes we see some providers who get out of sync with the blockchain, and that consensus is what that is all about. Now that is one of the parts of the metadata which we know we can just delete and it'll rebuild. It's not necessarily unique to a provider, because every provider's got the same view of that. Other aspects of the metadata are very unique. So the host folder, for example, that contains information about your provider ID, your folders, which are set up, where your data is stored. Obviously, that is far more critical. So if anything goes wrong with that folder, then this is where things like backups come into play. There's also the wallet database, which keeps a track of all the transactions in your provider wallet. And there are some elements to the metadata which are kind of left over from the old project, which we inherited the software from, which are not really important. We don't really use these days.
Cool. Thanks for touching on that. Typically, the way that I I hope you can tell me if this is accurate, but typically the way I've thought of metadata in the past is that the wallet software like SPD or SPC or whatever, that's kind of the body, but metadata is the brains. So you can kind of pick one computer's or one storage provider's metadata, and you could theoretically drop that on another computer as long as it does SPD, and it could kind of pick up from there. So that would be the equivalent of a brain swap, I guess. But it's kind of its history and its identity of what makes your storage provider different from someone else's. That is the metadata, right?
Exactly. It's a bit like on a Windows PC. Your user folder contains your documents, your downloads, your bookmarks and things. You could install Windows on another PC and move your profile across, and all your info is there. So yeah, the metadata is that kind of equivalent.
Okay, cool. So we've kind of touched on what the metadata folder kind of looks like and some of the different components of it. But on my storage provider, and I'm going to leave it unspecific of what storage provider I have, but if I have a storage provider, where might I find it?
Yeah, so the two main kind of operating systems that we obviously support, Linux and Windows, by default, they each have a location which, if you don't specify it when you very first start SPD, the first time you deploy your provider, they will put it, or the SPD software will choose a default location to store your metadata. The document which I posted in the events channel kind of goes into it. In Linux, it's in your home folder /.sc prime, which is actually a hidden folder. If you try and do an ls, you won't see it. You have to do ls-lsa, and you'll see that .sc prime folder. So that's the Linux location. On Windows, it's in your home folder, or your user folder / app data local sc prime. So that will be the default location if you don't specify it. Now, when you first start SPD, you can choose a specific location if you want, using the -d flag. And this is one of the kind of common mistakes or errors that storage providers make, is they'll start it up, point it at one location, and then 6 months later, next time they reboot the PC or upgrade SPD, they'll point it at a different location, or forget to point at their C column metadata, for example, and they'll they'll just point it at a new location, which is often the default, and so that creates actually a new provider because your metadata is your provider at the end of the day. So that's a kind of common mistake that we often see providers make, is not specifying the -d flag every single time they start SPD. You always need to specify the same location.
Okay, yeah, and I'd like to emphasize again that the document that you shared in the events channel, as always, I can't talk enough about how essential our docs are to the storage provider experience. If pretty much any aspect of knowledge that you might need to have as a storage provider is addressed somewhere in the docs. So yeah, lots of things about where to find metadata. That one of the first places I would look if I were a storage provider and I was asking that question would be the docs. So thank you for steering people in that direction, and that's something that I can't emphasize enough. So cool. Now, you mentioned a bit earlier, like a metadata backup. What does that mean, and is that something that you recommend?
Yeah, so this is something which is quite common that we talk about in the channels, is if people have backups of their metadata, because metadata can be corrupted. Unfortunate byproduct of things like power failures. So backing up that metadata folder, we always recommend, because then you have if your metadata does get corrupted, you have a chance to recover your provider. And that kind of corruption can happen to different parts of the metadata. Sometimes it is recoverable by deleting the file that the SPD is kind of tripping up on. Things like we had one case the other day of the fingerprints bucket file. SPD was complaining about that when trying to load up. That's one file, luckily, that you can just go and delete, and SPD can then recover from that situation. Other times, if other more important files are corrupted, then your only choice is to try and go back to a backup. So it is important to take backups. Try and set something up that is regular and automated, so that you don't have to remember to do backups. There's a third-party script from Tacom in the third-party tools channel. If anyone wants to go and use that, or adjust that to their particular setup, then that's a good starting place. Once you've got backup or automated backup sets, we say typically at least daily is a good way to do backups. The more often you can do it, the better. But definitely doing it is better than not doing it.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm glad that you kind of touched on. So we've been talking a lot about what metadata is and why it's important. But yeah, ultimately the reason why one might want to take a backup is because stuff can happen to metadata. So occasionally, the metadata can get corrupted. That could be, like you mentioned, a power outage or some kind of disk failure. There's all sorts of things that could conceivably result in some of those files being damaged. And then, like you said, well, I guess kind of working with our brain analogy, there are some parts of the brain that are more, I guess, vital or sensitive than others. So there are some parts of metadata that if they get damaged or corrupted in any way, it'll totally refuse to work. But then there are some other folders that you can just kind of lobotomize, I guess, and and just get rid of, and it'll regrow and recover fully on its own. So metadata can sometimes, if you're really in-depth debugging it, it can sometimes feel a bit like doing brain surgery. But that's kind of the worst of it, and that's not the experience most people have, I would say. So, I mean, most people might not even know that metadata even existed until today. So we're not trying to scare people, but at the same time, there is kind of a best practice that a storage provider could do, and that does involve backups, right?
Exactly, yeah. And it's a good idea to understand at least the concept of metadata, why it's important, where it is, etc., before you actually need to find this stuff out. Because typically that's when you start to learn this. Once it's too late and you've lost your provider, because you weren't taking backups, or you have overwritten your metadata, for example, because you didn't understand it. So we always try to encourage the providers to learn this stuff before it becomes a problem, and before they lose their provider, because that's as time goes on and providers build up more time and service and history and data, it's going to become more costly if people have to start over. These days, when you've got a few hundred gigs, it's not the end of the world, but obviously down the line, we want people to do things in the right way so that it doesn't cost them in the future.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So if metadata can and occasionally does go a little awry, what are some of the ways that could look like? So how might I know if something's happened to my metadata?
Typically, when you start up SPD, you'll see SPD not fully starting. So if you watch SPD when it starts, it loads up 5 modules. If you're not running the renter module, which good providers shouldn't be running the renter module, and the host module is the last of those, and typically that's where it kind of it trips up and it never completely loads, or sometimes it will spit out an error messages, which kind of look pretty scary when you look at them. When you get down to it, typically it'll tell you there's a particular file which is struggling to load. So they go back to the example, I think it was yesterday, where someone was having an error on their fingerprints bucket file. So first thing to try is to delete that file, and then try and load SPD again, and see if it then completes loading the 5 modules. You might see it fail on the previous modules, and more often that is the host module which it fails to load. That gives us a clue where the problem is, and if it's kind of easily fixable by deleting that file, if it's something that's deletable, or if it's something more important and you have to go back to a backup to try and recover things.
Okay, I'll ask you a question next that I kind of know the answer to. So this is a leading question. This wouldn't be allowed in court, but we'll go with it. So metadata backups, is that like a silver bullet solution? Is there any complications that can happen from using a metadata backup? And what are some ways that could look like if there is a problem that could happen?
Yeah, so it's not always a totally sort of clean recovery from using a metadata backup. We have these thing called contract revisions, where the contractor is creating revisions on a contract, and if your backup is from a previous revision of a contract which you have, then they get out of sync. And we're seeing some cases of that recently, which then you don't get a clean recovery from, because the contractor says, well, this guy's running from an old revision of the contract and isn't in sync with me. And what we've seen recently with a few providers, that's kind of ended up causing is the provider to kind of get on the banned list, which is basically our contractor saying, this guy's not behaving properly, we want to stop using him. So one of the things we're kind of...
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on that. So that's a situation that happens, right, when the renter, or the kind of on the more storage uploading side, they are in contact with every storage provider, right? And the renter themselves kind of keep a list of everybody that they've uploaded data to and what the last kind of state that they talked to that provider with. So I guess this is kind of a situation you're describing where there's a disagreement of state where the renter says, hey, I last worked with you like this morning, and you should have a file that I gave you this morning. But if you're using a backup from a couple days ago, then your storage provider is going to say, hey, the last thing that I got from you was a couple days ago. And then the renter is going to be confused, and the storage provider is going to be confused, and they're going to disagree on what the kind of state of the contract is, and that could lead to things just getting out of sorts. So, yeah, there is potentially some kind of work on the renter side and the provider side to help resolve those kinds of situations. That wasn't something that was very prominent, and I guess it still isn't prominent. But this is a situation that we're seeing from some people that I guess are pretty liberal with using older metadata backups. We just do want to emphasize that it is kind of important that they're fairly current, but that it isn't like totally a silver bullet or just like a magic solution using a metadata backup. They don't 100% work all the time, at least in the sense that they can sometimes yield just from the timing of things. They could sometimes result in your storage provider not having the latest state of a contract or of some sort of storage agreement, and that can cause issues as well.
Exactly. Yes, it's better to have that backup and have a chance of recovery or clean recovery than not to have the backups in the first place and have no choice to start over if things get corrupted.
Cool. So I think I will I'll give Mark an opportunity here to kind of think of if there's anything about metadata that might be important to kind of touch on that we haven't yet. And I'll also open up the floor, or at least if anybody has any questions, either about anything that we've talked about or about metadata specifically, or just any experiences that they've had with backing up and metadata, anything like that. You can put your hand up or share in the events channel, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, so I think there's a question actually in the events channel or point, which is a good one, and it's something we have spoken about in terms of road mapping, is some sort of feature within the XMiner software to do backups. The hardware XMiners have had that function in them, but the full software license doesn't have anything at the moment to back up metadata. But certainly that's the sort of thing which and sort of advantage which we can put into the full license software to deal with backups and things for the user. So something we have talked about, and I'm sure we'll once funding and developers are available, we'll look into.
Hey Jeff, good time. Can you talk?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
We can.
It's just really cool to hear Sparky do all this share that I've seen him do, front line in the channels. And just want to give a good job, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I would like to also second that Mark does a awesome job in the channels, and I am sure that a lot of people here in the audience would agree that maybe if they had issues or they had any questions, if they asked them in the channels anywhere, there's a very good chance that it was Mark that took time out of his day to answer. So thank you.
You're welcome, Jeff, and everyone.
Hey, Dietrich.
Hey, thanks, guys. Just a question on backing up the metadata. Is it, do you think, as far as keeping older versions of it, say if I'm backing up daily, is it good? Might there be a scenario where I'd want to have the metadata from, say, 2 days ago or 3 days ago as well? Or is it something where I'm probably fine just overwriting the backup every day that I do it?
I think it's one of those cases that if you've got the space to keep multiple copies of the metadata, it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them, if you know what I mean. Generally, the latest backup will be the one you would try first, but there's the possibility, of course, that the last backup was also corrupted, and so you might find you need to go back to an older one. That's a fairly, I think, rare occurrence. But yeah, you're better off having keeping multiple backups if you've got the space on wherever you're storing them to keep a week's worth or whatever. So yeah, keep as many as you can. One good point actually to add to that is the one thing you don't need to back up is the consensus DB file, which is about 95% of the overall size of your consensus or your metadata folder. The consensus, you can always either download the bootstrap from our software download site or just let your provider resync from the network. So you don't need to back up that file, and that's about 4.5 gigs out of roughly 5 gigs typically. So if space is an issue, exclude that consensus DB from your backups because you really don't need to back up that file.
Lovely. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And thanks for all your help in the support channel.
No problem. No problem.
Okay, so we have the question of what do you recommend backing up to, like a flash drive, and if something like a USB drive, do you need like a certain size? I know you just kind of alluded to like 4.5 to 5 gigs, but can you give some guidance on what kind of format or what medium would a backup be good for?
Yeah, sure. So the speed of the backup kind of medium isn't overly important, I'd say. What I've used is some of these SanDisk USB pen drives, which are really short, so you can plug them into the back of a PC and they don't stick out. And they're about 32 gigs in size and fairly cheap, less than $10 each. So I can just plug one of those into each of my DIY providers and do backups to that. And with that 32 gigs, I can keep multiple copies on that. So they're USB 3, so they're fairly quick. So that's one option. There's no right or wrong answer, to be honest, for what and where to store your metadata. If you've got like an FTP server in your network, you could copy it into an FTP server. Mainly, the main kind of thing is to store it off of the actual PC itself. So don't keep your metadata backup on the same OS drive or the same drive your OS is running on, because if you lose that drive, you lost your backups as well as the metadata. So make sure it's stored off the provider, whether that's on another PC, a USB pen drive, an FTP server.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Just from a security standpoint, that you probably shouldn't. Yeah, you should probably. Doesn't make a lot of sense to keep the backup on the same actual disk as the original, because then, with one fell swoop of misfortune, you could lose both. So
Exactly.
that would not be ideal. And then your metadata isn't doing a very good job of serving you if it is also dead. So, okay, we have another question relating to kind of migrating or upgrading your operating system. So if the metadata is the brains of the storage provider, and I know I kind of alluded to earlier doing somewhat of a brain swap. So what should you do, or how should you approach migrating metadata from maybe one Windows computer to another Windows computer? And is it even possible to move metadata from Windows to something like Linux?
Yeah, so if you want to move to a new PC, but the same operating system, it's simply a case of taking that whole metadata folder and placing it onto the new PC. It doesn't actually need to be in the same location, although it makes sense to do that. As long as when you start SPD, you point SPD at where the metadata folder is on the new PC, and also your storage drives / folders are moved across, and they're in the same path as well. So if they're d:/data on the old PC, make sure they're on the D drive on the new PC. Then you can just start your provider up, and it'll be the same from the provider point of view. It is possible to move Windows to Linux, and I've written a guide for that, which I can post in the events channel as well. That one does need some element of brain surgery though, because the paths on Linux and Windows are a completely different format. So you can't make a Linux path look like a Windows path. So what you have to do in that case is go and edit one of the files inside the metadata to change d:/data to /mount/data or something like that. Other than that, it's kind of the same process in terms of taking that whole metadata folder, copying it across, start SPD, pointing at that folder. But just needs that little bit of brain surgery to make it look like a Linux path now. So there's a guide. I'll get that posted in the events channel now as to how to do that. It is something that quite a few people have successfully done. So it seems to be fairly robust process.
Thank you. So we have another guest on stage. Tom Tree, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you very much. Quick question on the backups. I've read conflicting on the Discord. Using rsync on Linux to do the backups, does the SPD daemon need to be stopped while you're doing that rsync?
Yeah, a good question. It's one of those things that generally it doesn't need to be, but because your metadata is often being written to, if you're trying to make a copy of it while SPD is also writing to it, then there's the chance, the outside chance, in theory at least, of either that copy not being up to date or causing a conflict with what SPD is trying to do at the time. I take this kind of safe approach of stopping SPD, making the backup, and then start SPD again. That's kind of the safe approach, because then you know nothing is writing or reading from that metadata while you're making a copy of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if you when you're doing the copy, if you exclude the consensus, then you can copy the rest of the metadata backup in pretty quick time, so that your SPD is only down for 30 seconds or so. So it doesn't really cause any downtime as such.
Right. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll start wrapping up. I want to thank you foremost for coming up on stage and enlightening us all on metadata, which is to some people kind of a thing that we've heard a lot about, but if you really plumb into it, it is kind of complex, and there's a lot of intricacy to understanding like what kind of cadence a reasonable backup of metadata might be, just kind of the purpose of metadata in general, I suppose. So yeah, we covered a lot, and I want to thank you for taking the time to explain that to us. Aside from that, yeah, we touched on, well, I'll ask you this, Mark. Were you listening to the first section of the call? I think I might have seen you in the audience.
Oh yes, yeah, I was listening in the car. Yeah.
So we touched on, in that first section of the call, we kind of touched on our Black Friday and Beyond sale. So SPF-B, is that something that you are looking forward to yourself? Do you have a route already planned on getting some of those?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of X miners which I'm planning to swap the SCP rebates for SPF-B, and plus the full licenses. I think I've lost track of how many I've got. I think about 6 full licenses, which I'll probably do the same on.
Okay, cool. So you'll be drowning in SPF-B, but not that yeah, not that there's a such thing as having too much of that. But cool. So yeah, looking forward to being able to actually put SPF-B out into the wild. We kind of touched on our S3 app integration as well, which is something that is pretty important to me, and I think crucial to helping get more storage on the network. And yeah, those kind of conversations about targeting specific regions through kind of incentives and the potential of some other things like referrals, services, and different things like that. Looking forward to being able to make some announcements over the next couple of weeks on those kinds of topics. But in general, I just wanted to thank everybody for showing up this week. Of course, if there's anything that we didn't touch on or any questions that went unanswered, you know where to find us. There's a good chance that if you ask in a channel that you might be talking to Mark or a screen named Sparky directly. So cool. Thanks for coming out this week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with another storage provider related topic and more updates and announcements and fun stuff. Cool. Take care.